CISO Choice Awards Vendor Recognition with Richard Stiennon.
Hi, Richard Stiennon here, and I'm speaking with Paul Paget, who's CEO of Black Kite. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Richard.
Congratulations on winning the CISO's Choice Award. That's quite a distinction.
You have a distinguished group of CISOs, so it means a lot to us. Thank you.
Yeah, indeed we do. What I was dying to talk about with you is Black Kite's differentiation, right? So third-party risk assessments, essentially, have been with us for years and years. Several players in the space, and along comes Black Kite and is growing and getting funding, and there must be something that makes that happen, right? Sets you apart. So that's what I wanted to dig into today. So give us your views on why Black Kite's doing so well.
Sure. Well, thanks for that. When you come into a market that has incumbents, you better have something different and something better. Otherwise, you're just another one of the same old. So we approach the whole thing differently. And timing is also important. I'll talk about that in a second, but timing is also important too, which is the increase in the attacks on organizations through their third parties or fourth parties and so on. And the bad guys have figured out that ransomware is a pretty cool thing to inflict on people. So they use the same old techniques of compromising organizations, but they're focused on third parties now because it's easier than going at the big, well-established companies that have really tightened down their defenses. But it's a way to sort of island hop their way in or ransom the people that are in those third-party networks and supply chains. And so those two things together have combined to make the market very, very hot right now for this particular technology. And then from a differentiation standpoint, we approached it with standards. You can't measure anything unless you measure it against some standard. So we use standard metrics like the MITRE cybersecurity framework, ratings framework, or scoring framework. And we use open fair so that you can look at things from a financial risk perspective. And we do think that it's all about risk. Cyber ratings are important, but what's more important is what risk does it present and how do you make risk decisions? And so those are a couple of things that we focus on from a differentiation standpoint. And then the final thing is scale. If you're only looking at your tier one vendors, you're not looking at the whole picture. And so how do you scale this thing? Well, you have to be able to do that very cost effectively because it's not cost effective to do the kind of assessment you have to do today at scale. And so we solve that problem as well.
Help me understand how a third-party risk assessment works, because how much can you really tell by looking from the outside at the internet exposed surface of a vendor of any sort, right? If there's a little, I don't know, supplier of whatever in northern Michigan and their website was built in 1990 and hasn't been touched, it's going to have all these problems with it, but it tells me nothing about their internal systems that aren't attached to their web server at GoDaddy.
That's right. Yeah. And that's the biggest question a lot of CISOs have, which is how do I know? Because we've been trained to look at things from the inside and assess things from the inside. But it's pretty interesting. If something looks bad from the outside, it's a pretty high correlation with it's bad on the inside. Sort of like a couple of analogies. You drive down the street, the shutters are falling off, the roof needs fixing. Chances are they don't have a brand new state-of-the-art kitchen inside, right? So yep. That's one way to look at it. So, and that seems to hold true. And the challenge is you cannot take the techniques of doing your own assessment of your own organization and apply them to hundreds of third parties. It's not scalable.
Yep.
So your choices are ignore it or do something. And then the challenge for us and any other vendor in this space is you better do a good job from the outside, because if you don't, you're going to waste people's time surfacing companies that need attention. And so we've worked very hard to increase the efficacy of the ratings by looking at 292 unique factors that go into our ratings, whereas our competitors only do about a third of that. And so if you increase the fidelity of the picture from the outside, you still have just a picture from the outside, but you get a better idea if you increase the fidelity of that. You really have to look at everything that's available on the outside, and we do that.
And is there, speaking of scale, is there almost reuse of assessments? In other words, say you entered a big acquirer of products in a certain vertical, and so you had to assess their 250 suppliers, and now you get a customer who's also in the same vertical, and they have a lot of overlap in suppliers. Does that give you an immediate leg up, or is it all starting fresh with each customer?
It does. If there's duplication, we can see how many people are looking at some of the big name companies. There's certainly a lot of duplication there.
Sure.
But the risk is in the long tail that's not being watched. So all the major players in the space look at the big players, the big IT vendors in particular. Mm-hmm. But supply chain is very much underserved. A lot of organizations think in terms of risk, cyber risk being with their IT vendors. But if you think about it, the supply chains are very sophisticated. They're very attached to both data and to networks. And they also have their own software products that are part of supply chain. So all that stuff is part of the third party picture. That is, underserved. Most companies only look at 5 to 10% of the vendors that are in their footprint. And for the attacker, the footprint is the whole thing. Right? The attack surface is the whole thing. And so if you don't start with that, then you're really kind of only looking at a fraction of the surface. And the attackers don't play by your rules. So they're not saying, well, I'll only look at your tier one vendors. They'll look at everything. And they'll look beyond the IT vendors. So today, if you look at the numbers, according to one of the big research organizations, about 17% of the large companies do some form of continuous monitoring. But we know from dealing with a lot of those companies, they only do a small fraction of their vendors. So even the ones that do continuous monitoring only look at a small fraction of the vendors.
I'm really glad that third-party risk management is becoming a thing, and supply chain risks are now evident to everybody post SolarWinds. And yet I go all the way back to thinking of 2010, which was a supply chain attack that took several hops before it got to Lockheed. And it started with, I think, an HR benefits company that got them the foot in the door at RSA, where the attackers purportedly from China were able to, steal the Secure ID login tokens, the secret seeds to those tokens. And then they attempted to log into Lockheed Martin with those spoof Secure ID tokens. So, multiple hits demonstrated that at least nation states were all over the supply chain. But it's taken an extra 10 years for, the profit motivated cyber criminals to go, hey, this is really going to work for us. And now, of course, we are where we are, and it's a pretty scary world.
Yeah, the ransomware problem is a pandemic-like problem. It is more pervasive than people give it credit for, because it's not a major sort of attack event. We know about the Colonial Pipeline because it gets a lot of press attention. It's one big event, right? But this stuff is happening all over the place all the time. We believe that more than half the companies out there have been hit by ransomware, and half of them have paid the ransomware, which is, that if you think of it at that scale, that's a massive, massive problem. But it doesn't get the attention because it's not a singular event. It's happening all over the place. It's sort of like it's like the pandemic that we face in healthcare.
Right.
You don't know where it is, but it's everywhere. And it's the same thing with ransomware. So that's something that I can tell you that in the companies that we're engaging with, they're well aware of it, because, and we don't necessarily know whether they've been hit by ransomware, but you kind of get a sense of that they're aware of the problem.
Yeah.
Probably have been hit pretty hard.
So, Paul, how should people start an engagement with you? How do they get a hold of you? What's it look like when they do?
Yeah, what we like to do is so obviously it's Black Kite is our website, blackkite.com. But what we like to get you to try this thing out. We like you to start with 10 or 20 of your vendors from a diversity of vendors, not just, the big names, fine, that's fine, but everybody's monitoring them. So we would encourage you to put some supply chain, some other vendors, different kinds, maybe a marketing vendor that's small, but might have access to your database, that type of thing. And give it a run for the money, because you'll see the best way to understand how to do this is, it's like teaching people how to fish, right? And once they get it, they'll be able to they'll know what to do. They'll figure out what they have to do. So the risk tolerance for an organization and what they want to do really varies. And so it's helpful if we can show them how do these vendors look? These are vendors, these are vendors you may have actually done more assessment. You obviously have questionnaires for these vendors, but do you really know what's going on? And then take some time to actually engage them and see how you can improve the situation. Because if you can reduce the risk, both the cyber risk and the financial quantitative risk, then in theory, you're reducing the risk to your organization. So that's what we're trying to help people see, not just, ratings can be, it's wallpaper, right? It doesn't do anything unless you do something about it. And so that's how we like to think that we can help you take the rating information and turn it into something that's useful to your organization. So you feel good about things. You don't feel good about your own cybersecurity because you know what you're doing and you're monitoring your own cybersecurity. But if you could do that with 100, 200, 1,000 of your vendors, wouldn't that be cool? I mean, nobody came to work thinking they could ever do that. So we can take you in that direction, and we can make you feel really good about your supply chain, your third parties, your digital footprint, your attack surface. We can help you with that.
Beautiful. I want to thank you so much, Paul, for letting us in on what Black Kite actually does. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Richard. Good to see you again.
Likewise.
Stay tuned for more from CISOs Connect.